Hey everybody, Charles for HumbleMechanic.com, back today with episode 52 of the Humble Mechanic podcast. Today we're going to be talking about bringing your old car into the dealership for service. You may have noticed that I missed a couple of days of shows, and that's because my wife and I actually welcomed a new member into the family, a little baby girl, so we're really excited about that. Thank you all for all of the well wishes, thoughts, and whatnot. We really appreciate it. Very weird experience for me to be someone's dad, so I'm trying to figure all that out and do my best for her. But along with that, I've been kind of strapped for time, so I reached out to you guys on Facebook and asked, what did you want today's show to be about? Normally on Mondays we do a Q&A show, but those actually take me about 3 times longer to do than just a show like this. So a ton of awesome suggestions, and this one really stuck out to me. You know, it's not something we've really ever touched on. We've talked about modified cars at the dealership before, and this is kind of along the same lines, but not really. So Jacob, very awesome suggestion. Thank you for that. Now, like I mentioned, we talked about bringing modified cars into the dealership, which can be a really good thing or a really bad thing depending on the dealership. And actually bringing an old car into the dealership is almost exactly the same. You really need to find the right place to do that. To be very honest, now, and this is coming from a dealership technician, a dealership's not my first choice when I think of an old car. You know, being in the VW world, it's easy to think water-cooled versus air-cooled. So when I think air-cooled, I don't think of bringing it to the dealership whatsoever. You know, when you get into some of the older water-cooled stuff, maybe yes, maybe no, but air-cooled at the dealership is just not something that I ever really think of. In fact, my dealership has, 7 or 8 air-cooled cars in the showroom, and we actually don't work on them. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why we don't in just a minute. So when you think about the dealership, you think about new cars, 2015s right now. You know, the 2016s are probably going to be out soon. So we generally focus on brand new to about 5 years old. That covers the entire warranty period as well as the next few years out. Now, it's not uncommon to see cars right now at the 10-year mark, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, but those are getting really rare. Once you hit about 8 years old, the number of vehicles we see of that generation actually go down quite a bit. There's actually even a few guys in the dealership that aren't super familiar with working on the Mark IV generation stuff, which stopped in 2005. But again, that's 10 years old. It's crazy to think that those are the cars that I was PDIing when I first started. But now when you even move further back into the Mark III generation, there's very few that come through the dealership. And in the 11 years that I've worked there, there's really not been a ton of them that have come through. I think I've seen exactly 0 Mark IIs come through the dealership. And we've actually had 1 or 2 Mark Is, but both of those were actually only in for an alignment. I think I've seen 1 or 2 Corrados, 0 Scirocco's, and maybe 2 Beetles that were air-cooled in for service. It's just not something that we work on. But if it's 2013, 2014, 2015, you bet your butt that's what the shop is full of right now. At the dealership, we have all the newest information, but they actually drop older information off. When I was building the VR, I had to dig and dig and dig for the information. It wasn't as easily accessible as if the vehicle were a 2014. And I had a really hard time finding any information on the Cabrio. In fact, the wiring diagram that I have for it, I got out of all data because I couldn't find it in the Volkswagen repair manual. Once we get so many years out past the vehicle being new, they actually do drop the information off because they need to make room for the new information. We also may not have the special tools required to do some of that stuff. Now, the special tools required to work on the modern stuff is a lot more than it was on the old stuff, but again, we probably don't have that. My dealership's almost 12 years old, and I can tell you there's a lot of Mark IV stuff that we don't have special tool-wise, and a ton of Mark III stuff that we don't have special tool-wise. If it wasn't a required tool at the time when the dealership opened and it was older, they never bought it. Or the tool broke over the years and there was really no reason to replace it. In fact, diagnostic-wise, if it's older than OBD2, which is 1996, we don't really have any way to communicate with the vehicles with that, that Volkswagen 2-prong thing that went to the data link connector plug. And not only does this information get purged out for repairs, and not only do the special tools not get replaced, but in the parts catalog, parts become obsolete as well. When I was doing stuff for the Cabby, I would want a little trim piece or a knick-knack screw or this little random bit, and I found almost none of it in the parts catalog. Thank goodness for aftermarket places that are now starting to come around and supplying some of these older parts. Otherwise, I would have been in big trouble with getting some of these parts for the Cabby. We had, in fact, a 1995 Cabrio come through the dealership. Now that's 20 years old. Old in the modern world, for me, when I think of a 1995 vehicle, I don't really think it's that old. But in the parts and service world, that's ancient. We tried to get a brake master cylinder, and it was in the parts catalog, but it was like $700, and it was obsolete, so we couldn't even get it from Volkswagen. And dealerships really do prefer to sell factory parts. Unfortunately for that customer, it didn't work out so well because we weren't able to get the part for them. But really, to me, the biggest negative of taking an older car into the dealership is the technician's experience. I guarantee you that if you took a CIS vehicle into my dealership, almost nobody would know how to work on it. Even me, I'm not a CIS expert. I fixed my CIS in my Cabby by putting a VR6 in it. So, we don't have the tools, both in knowledge and skill and physical tools, to work on some of these older cars. Now, that's just my dealership, and that's most of the dealerships that I've encountered. But there are some really awesome dealerships that have, either guys that are enthusiasts that know these older systems in and out, know air-cooled, or heck, maybe they've just been around that long and worked on these air-cooleds when they were new, or worked on Mark 1s and Mark 2s when they were brand new. And if you have a dealership like that, that's awesome, and that's a totally different situation. But I'm pretty sure that that's a rare thing these days. So how do you know you have a dealership that's good with older cars? Call them and ask them. Ask them when the last time they worked on a Mark 1 Golf. Ask them when they worked on a Mark 2 Jetta. Ask them when they worked on a Scirocco or an air-cooled Beetle, or whatever make and model, is your flavor. Call them and ask them. And I'll bet you that if you call them and ask them and they do work on that, there's probably only one or two guys that do the majority of work on these older generation cars. So when you make your appointment or talk to the dealership about bringing your car in, make sure you get lined up with that specific technician so you know your car is going to be in good hands. You can also ask them where they get their parts for these older cars. Like I mentioned, Volkswagen drops parts all the time on older generation cars, so they may have a resource to readily get parts. You may have to actually supply your own parts in some of these cases as well. But luckily there's a ton of specialty shops and aftermarket places that really specialize in this older stuff. Whether it's older Mustangs, older Corvettes, older Volkswagens, air-cooled or water-cooled, it doesn't really matter. There are still a ton of places to get these type of vehicles worked on if you're not the type of person to do the work yourself. All right, guys, I'm gonna wrap it up there. What are your thoughts on bringing an older vehicle into the dealership for service or parts? And hey, if you're a tech at a dealership and you work on older generation vehicles, post that in the comments section so that we all know that there are a few of you guys out there. Hey, if you liked the video, throw it a thumbs up on YouTube. You can also subscribe on YouTube or on the blog at humblemechanic.com. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the blog, humblemechanic.com, and obviously on YouTube. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.